You're listening to A Slice of Therapy with me, Alun Parry. In today's episode, I want to look at decisions, because decisions are things we have to make a lot. And in terms of the power that we have in life, it's our power over decisions that mean that we really come into that kind of executive role. Sometimes, we view ourselves as powerless because we look at people who are, running major multinationals or are leading governments and think, well, they're the powerful ones. And yet we do actually have a lot of power in our lives day to day because we're constantly being asked to make decisions. And so in this episode, I want to look at 3 different ways to make decisions. Now, on these 3 different ways to make decisions, I'm not arguing that one of them is better than the other. What I am saying, though, is that when you know that there are more than one way of making decisions, it's almost like having, a little advisory board with you when a decision comes along, because you can take your decision from 3 different angles. And then that might prove a little bit more helpful and open up some more options than you otherwise had. So what are these 3 ways of making a decision that I'm going to talk about today? Well, the first one is an approach which might sound strange, randomness. The second is aiming to get the best. And the third is attempting to avoid the terrible. So let's take them each in turn. So the first one is randomness. Now, this might seem a strange thing to suggest. How can we make a decision really on randomness? But in fact, a lot of the significant decisions have been made by randomness. When you look at evolution itself, the way we've evolved as humans, a lot of these decisions that have turned out pretty functional have been made, in a sense, by randomness. Even in nature in other ways, what you'll find, for instance, bees are, they're very wise about where the best food sources are. And they even have a communication device, like a little wiggle that they give to each other, that helps everybody else know where the best food sources are. And yet some of the bees will fly off in random directions. Why on earth would they do that? Well, the benefit of incorporating at least some randomness to life is that you get some of the benefits of randomness. You get to find out things that you wouldn't have found out if you just carry on doing the same thing over and over again. And marketers know this. Anyone who runs Facebook ads, for instance, will tell you that even if they've got an ad that is performing very well, they will often do this thing called split testing. Now, what split testing is that they will just change an element of the advert at random. It might be the picture, it might be the headline, it might be something about the blurb underneath, just something. And they'll tweak it and send that out as well. And they will compare the ad that's performing well against these little tweaks. So they're involved in this randomness of natural selection. It's not necessarily thought through. They'll just take a punt on something and send it out there. And I'm reminded as well of the story where an American general came into his job on the first day. And one of his underlings said, well, the first thing on your desk, General, he said, is this decision. We've been mulling this over for years and haven't made any progress. We don't know whether to go with option A and puts down one envelope, or whether to go with option B and puts down another envelope. And without looking at either, the general tapped option B and said, that one. And his underling said, well, with respect, General, you've not read either of the proposals. And he was picking one at random. And he said, okay, but people have been looking at the proposals for the last 8 years and haven't made a decision. and making a decision, and we'll learn something from it. Now, the thing about randomness is that you can actually just tweak it and start with randomness as a mere starting point. So let's say, for example, if you're a musician and you've got an album of 12 songs, say, and you're wondering what the running order is, well, you could maybe randomize it and then see whether you like it or not. In fact, one great way of making a decision if you're stuck between two different options is actually simply to toss a coin. Because what happens when you toss a coin is, that point where the coin is mid-air, you might notice yourself being partisan in favour of one of those two options. And then if you notice that, irrespective of what the coin says, you've just got some information and you've made your decision. And so randomness can actually, especially on the smaller decisions, the things that don't matter so much, or those decisions that have just been lingering around for a long time, with like the general, randomness can actually help either make a decision or to give you a starting point so that you can understand how you feel. If you're that musician, for instance, with 12 songs on an album and wondering in what order to put them in, then that first random running order will give you some sense of discomfort around it, where you go, I don't like where that song is there. And then a shuffle later, you've got it. So randomness is what our entire evolution is kind of based on, isn't it? The whole development of nature has been based on randomness. And so as a decision maker, it's something that's maybe overlooked sometimes. So that's randomness out of the way. The second one is a very common one, which I'm sure that you recognise. It's that attempt to get the best. So I don't know, if you're about to buy something, you will attempt probably to get the best. You're buying a coat and you're there thinking, but which is the best one? Maybe it's a waterproof coat. Which one is best at keeping out the rain, for instance? Which one is warmer on a cold day? And we'll attempt to get the best. Now, one of the problems of trying to get the best is that it can be quite stressful and it can be very costly in terms of time. I can think of many purchasing decisions I've made where I've actually felt really unpleasant as I'm trying to make the decision, because it feels very confusing and there's all these different options and I have this real fear. And the fear is, oh no, am I going to choose the wrong one? And what I mean by that is, am I not going to choose the best one? And so it can be very stressful and it can be very costly. But sometimes, especially if it's a straightforward choice, aiming to get the best makes sense, doesn't it? You might be in a shop, there might be two coats there, which are, the same amount of money. But one of them is waterproof and the other one isn't. And so you say, okay, I'll take that one, because according to my criteria of what I need a coat for, that's the best. And so sometimes it's really, really obvious, in which case it's a good strategy to try and get the best. But in other circumstances, it does come at a cost in terms of your stress, your mental energy, and in terms of your time as well. And it can be kind of unpleasant trying to get the best all the time. So we've looked at randomness and we've looked at trying to get the best, which comes with some costs sometimes. So what's an alternative to aiming to get the best? Well, that's the third one, which is aiming to avoid the terrible. Now, when you're aiming to avoid the terrible, you have a completely different mindset than when you're trying to get the best. And you might be thinking, well, why would you simply seek to avoid the terrible? And the reason for that is it comes down to the issue of variance. Because there's a couple of things in terms of decisions. It's like, what's going to be the best? But that's not normally how life works. Life works in a way where you kind of have a bit of a wavy line, don't you? So if you think of life on a graph, the lowest possible and the highest possible if there's a big gap there, so you have a great big dip and a great high peak, the high peaks might allow you to get the best. But if that thing is full of variance, then there's a problem and you might end up with something really awful. Now, a good example of this is, let's say you were playing a gambling game, and if you won, you get, say, a huge amount of money. And of course, you put a stake on that. So here's a gambling game. One gambling game is you're going to win the money. And all you have to do is guess what number will come up when I roll this dice. So I'm going to roll the dice and you guess, and you win all the money. The problem with this gambling game is you've only got 1 in 6 chance. You might think of a number 3, but, it's only going to have a 1 in 6 chance that the person's going to roll the dice and it will land as a number 3. It might be a 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and then you lose. So you've only got a 1 in 6 chance. But let's say somebody said, well, actually, you can win the same amount of money on this game, but you've got a 5 in 6 chance of winning. Well, that's lots better, isn't it? And so you might say, well, that's clearly the best. But here's the problem, because this is where variance come in. This is where avoiding the terrible might make sense. Because before you opt for the game where you say, great, I've got a 5 in 6 chance winning, let me tell you that game is called Russian roulette. And so Russian roulette is where you get a gun, you put 1 bullet in the chamber, so 5 are empty, you spin the chamber, put the gun to your head and fire. Now, you might no longer think, now you know the rules of the game, that Russian roulette is best. Clearly you've got more chances of winning, but the downside, the terrible thing, the variance is so huge that the terrible is just too big to contemplate. And so I'm guessing in that situation, you probably roll the dice. To take a more mundane example, let's say, for instance, you had to get somewhere and there were 2 possible routes. Now, one of the routes was quicker. Typically it's quicker. But on that route, it'll save you 15 minutes each time. But on that route, when it's bad, it's terrible, and you're stuck in a traffic snarl for literally hours. You may well choose the worst option. The worst option meaning, in this case, the slower one, which will get you there 15 minutes slower, but reliably so. That second route has so little variance that you can basically be pretty much certain that you're going to get there at the time you expect to get there. The route that is normally 15 minutes faster, you know that there's a reasonable chance that on an off day, you could be stuck in a snarl up for, say, 2.5 hours. Now, if you had a really important meeting to go to, I'm pretty sure that what you would do there is to take the route that would reliably get you there, albeit slower. And so avoiding the terrible is an important thing. It's why, for instance, people will pay more money in order to buy something which is branded. It might be pretty similar to the other product, but if you get a product and, you don't know what the hell it is and you don't know who's made it, then you may well pay more for the branded product that has a little bit of reputation at stake. Because you know that the branded product probably isn't going to be terrible, but this completely unbranded thing of the same might absolutely be awful. I'm reminded as well that, if ever you buy something on a site like Amazon that comes with customer reviews, I noticed that you could just order these items by how high their average rating was. But if you order it by how high their average rating is, you're missing the variance. And so what I tend to do is I try and find a high rated product, but not the highest rated, but a high rated product that has the fewest 1-star ratings, because then I'm avoiding the terrible. And avoiding the terrible strikes me as a good thing to include in our decision making. So let's have a quick recap then of these 3 different ways of approaching a decision to be made. The first one was randomness, After all, we're here at the moment because of randomness. Nature uses randomness a lot. Marketers use randomness. And actually randomness, even if we don't decide to follow its advice, can actually give our body certain information as we feel discomfort or we feel support for an option. While a coin is in midair, for instance. The second type is a very common one, which you probably use a lot, which is attempting to get the best, which works great when it's straightforward and where there's low variance and where you're not going to be putting a lot of mental energy and time into it. Getting the best does make sense. But then there's that third one, which is about avoiding the terrible. About Russian roulette, for instance, looking good on the face of it because you got a 5 out of 6 chance of winning. But the variance is so high that it'd be well worth avoiding. Or the traffic route, where you would choose the slower route simply because it's more reliable and consistent. And so what's happened here, if you think of these 3 different ways of making a decision, is that if you have a kind of favourite way of making a decision, you've now got a council. You've now got a board of advisors who can advise you in 3 new ways. If you found this episode useful, please do share it so other people can get the benefits as well. If you'd like to work with me directly, I'm Alun Parry, and you can find more about me at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. And of course, you don't have to be local to me because I work online, so you can be based absolutely anywhere. And of course, please subscribe to the podcast as well because it's absolutely free and it means that you'll never miss an episode again. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you again on the next one.